Why did you eat your hair?
I certainly didn't mean to.
Coming into your daughter?
Hairball! We don't even have a cat. Hello folks! Welcome to another video with me, Stephanie Canada, the owner of Backroom Finds. Today what we're going to be doing is not something I intended, but hey, we're gonna run with it. I was staring at my closet of vintage clothes and got very frustrated at the number of 22, 23, and 24-inch waist items that I had. Now, there's not a whole lot I can do for most of them because they're so fitted and have no seam allowance that there's just nothing to be done. However, there are a few that I can fix. I can fix it! Wreck-It Ralph, anybody? No? Okay, we're gonna move on. So we're gonna start a new series called Make It Bigger, because I don't have enough projects going on. Quick disclaimer. I want to let you guys know that I have been working on costume pieces and vintage or modern clothes basically my entire life. Which means my mother handed me a seam ripper when I was 7 and said, have fun. So I destroyed a few garments that no one really cared about long before I started touching actual vintage. So please be careful if you guys do want to do this, I'm all for it, but I would advise starting with a modern piece of clothing that you really don't care about if you screw it up, before you dive into anything that you have that's vintage, or anything you want to buy that's vintage that you would like to adjust to your size. The first item that popped to my attention in the massive closet of vintage I haven't dealt with is going to be a 1960s Lilly Pulitzer A-line skirt with a scallop bottom. The reason this one really intrigued me was because I remembered when I first found it, it had not one or two, no friends, it had 3 separate stitching lines as the lady made it smaller. None of which were the same size length or the same color. Yeah. Now, I acquired this piece at the Goodwill outlet, also known as the Goodwill bins. If you guys have a question about what that is, let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to do a video for you when I can eventually get out of the house. In short, the Goodwill outlet is where you go and dig through clothing and pay by the pound. So I don't have much invested in this if I screw it up. This one took me 2 days because I wanted to make sure that I did it correctly, as I do intend to resell it, and so that I can do all the steps in the correct order and give it the proper time and care that it deserves, because it really is a very gorgeous skirt. Or at least it will be when it's done. Let's have some coffee and seam rip some stuff. Step 1, seam rip, and then pull all the threads out. One of the strangest things about this skirt when I found it was that it had 3 separate stitching lines on the inside of the skirt. Which unfortunately means 3 times the number of seams to rip before it's back to its normal state. Now, while I was very careful about how I ripped off the seams, I cannot say the same for the previous owner. They had left large gashes in the fabric that I unfortunately had to put into the seam allowance so that they wouldn't be seen on the exterior of the skirt. Otherwise, the waistband could have been at least an inch larger. Step 2, spot clean and soak overnight. Step 3, launder appropriately and let air dry. Step 4, press out all the wrinkles. Step 5, pin and test the lay on your mannequin. I start out pinning with a 1-inch seam allowance, and after double checking the outside once I flip the skirt, I realized I have to go into 1 1/8 inch seam allowance instead. And just like magic, it's now pinned in the correct direction to sew in. Now because this seam allowance was so large, there was no notch on my sewing machine to help me keep a straight seam, so I used the painter's tape trick instead. Now that my painter's tape guideline is laid out at 1 1/8 inch, let's go ahead with step number 6, which is to sew the skirt sides back together again. Of course, always making sure to press those seams flat before you move any farther. I do head back over to the machine to give the facing a little machine stitch before I hand stitch the rest of it. Now what I had to do was do some finicky handwork sewing because some of the margins were so small along the top edge that it was impossible to pin in place. So I did slip stitches around all of these so that everything would stay in place before I was ready to use my machine to top stitch it all down. One of the reasons I absolutely love doing this is because not only does it make vintage accessible to those that don't have extremely small waists, but it also allows things that would have gone to the quote garbage pile after being in the Goodwill bins a new life. I would much rather take the time to save a vintage garment from the trash can than to go out and buy a fast fashion item that's not my jam, never has been, never will be. I see these garments as little snippets of a past time, and I want to save that. Plus, our resources are finite on this planet, and I'm not about to waste them on fast fashion garments that will only last me 1 month, or if I'm lucky, a season. Whereas these garments have lasted the test of time, I feel like it's my duty to save them. Once I have everything slip stitched in place, I'm gonna top stitch that into place with my machine. One more quick press to make sure everything's laying correctly. I'm going to do a little hem that I'm not going to show you on camera, but I am going to give you a little reveal here. While this skirt still has its flaws, you know, a couple extra holes along the edges that I could only make a little bit better by washing and drying them properly and pulling along the bias gently to try and close those holes. I think it's still brilliantly beautiful, and it has a little pocket in the back, nice little scallops, very well worth my time to try and save. And now it's a lovely 28-inch waist. Hooray! For wearable vintage. Thanks so much for watching, folks. If y'all liked this video, make sure you click that like button. And if you want to see more from me and the things that I seam rip apart and make over again, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You can turn on the bell for post notifications and have YouTube eventually tell you when I post things. Probably a few days late. Thanks so much for watching, folks. See y'all next time. This is what happens when you try to get creative with makeup. You turn into Elphaba. I didn't even realize it was back there. That's where we're at today. I don't think I'm either one.
Okay, possibly anger. Why did you eat your hair?
I certainly didn't mean to. So our first victim is going to be... No, not victim.
Your first guinea pig.
That's a weird reference when I'm going to talk about seam ripping it there, Canada.
You're welcome.
The other reason this piece really stood out to me is because blue roses. I mean, really, who doesn't love blue roses? They're so pretty. Stop raising your hand. Thanks so much for watching. See y'all next time.
Wrong hand.
Huh?
You always do it with your right hand.
Do I?
You always lean like this.